Hi, Black Cat Recapped here. Today I am going to explain a comedy movie named Idiocracy. The movie starts in 2005 and tells a story about how human evolution is changing. Many science fiction ideas say that humans will become smarter and more advanced in the future. However, in this movie, something different happens. Humans are already the most powerful beings, but their evolution takes a bad turn. As time goes on, people actually become less intelligent. Under these circumstances, the U.S. Army librarian Corporal Joe Bauers is approached by his superiors who suggest that he participate in a significant experiment. Joe, who had wanted to be a librarian until he retired, is frustrated, but he is obligated to obey the commands. Next, we are shown a secret meeting among important military leaders. General Collins shares his ideas with the other officers. He explains that scientists have created a special sleeping pod for humans that can keep them preserved for a long time. The purpose is to save the best people in their prime and bring them back to life when they are needed. They have selected Joe to be the initial test subject because he is an ordinary man in the military and doesn't have a close family. Similarly, they needed a woman for the experiment, but they couldn't find a perfect match within the military. Therefore, Collins decides to choose a prostitute named Rita. He displays photos of himself and Rita's manager, Upgrade, having a good time at a party, making everyone in the room feel uneasy. He concludes the presentation by stating that the subjects will enter the pods the next day, and the experiment will last for a year. Due to the experiment's classified nature, the officials present in the room are forbidden from sharing the information with anyone. The following day, Joe and Rita find themselves in a waiting room. Joe introduces himself and inquires about Rita's field or profession. Not wanting to disclose that she is a prostitute, Rita claims she is a painter. Shortly after, they are both connected to IVs and placed inside separate human hibernation pods. Rita becomes anxious and attempts to get up, but Joe assures her that the scientists are knowledgeable and in control of the situation. He reassures her that they will only be inside the pods for a year, so everything will be alright. Finally, the two of them are sealed inside the pods. However, problems arise when Officer Collins is apprehended for his involvement in an attempted prostitution ring. Additionally, Upgrade, who is the mastermind behind the prostitution ring, is also arrested. As a result, there is no one left to take care of the hibernation pods. Due to a scandal, the military base shuts down, and the building containing the pods is destroyed. Joe and Rita remain in a dormant state within the pods while the years go by. As time passes, the average intelligence level gradually declines. Some individuals hold optimistic expectations that genetic engineering and scientific advancements could reverse this downward trend in human evolution. However, the most intelligent scientists in the world are instead engaging in foolish experiments, such as attempting to reverse hair loss and extend erections. During this time, the population rapidly grows, and intelligence keeps decreasing until the year 2505. Throughout all these years, people remain unable to find solutions to simple human issues, such as managing garbage disposal. As a result, garbage accumulates and piles up over centuries without any proper plan in place. Eventually, this leads to a massive event known as the Great Garbage Avalanche of 2505. One day, a huge landslide of garbage occurs, causing Joe's hibernation pod to land in a random house. Joe emerges from the pod feeling disoriented and bewildered. The person living in the house goes by the name of Frito Pendejo. Frito pays no attention to the massive pile of garbage or the presence of a stranger in his house. Instead, he carries on watching strange TV shows without a care. Frito only stands up briefly to request Joe to be quiet. We notice that his couch even has a toilet, so he doesn't have to get up frequently. Afterward, he forcefully ejects Joe out of the window. The world outside appears perplexing to Joe, and he remarks to himself about how much has changed in just a year. However, he remains unaware that he has actually arrived in the year 2505. He notices a gathering of individuals at the roadside who communicate using slang and grunts. Joe is able to comprehend their language, but when he speaks in his normal manner, they insult him with derogatory terms and chase him off. Feeling bewildered and experiencing dizziness, Joe resolves to visit a nearby hospital. Upon arrival, he approaches the receptionist and informs her that he is from the army. The woman at the reception desk doesn't comprehend what Joe is saying and randomly presses one of the many buttons on her desk. A voice instructs Joe to go to the diagnostic area located on the right. Feeling perplexed, he decides to quench his thirst by drinking water from a nearby fountain. However, instead of water, the fountain dispenses an energy drink called Brondo. When Joe inquires with a passerby about where he can find water to drink, the man ridicules Joe for wanting to consume something they only use in toilets. It becomes clear that in this world, everyone uses Brondo for bathing, drinking, and other everyday tasks, while water is exclusively reserved for toilet use. Subsequently, Joe proceeds to the diagnostic area, where he is instructed to insert plugs into his mouth, ear, and anus. The medical practitioner mistakenly switches the plugs that Joe had already inserted in specific locations. Joe feels disgusted but manages to finish the procedure as instructed. He is then directed to wait for a doctor. During the wait, he notices the date, 2505, written on a magazine but dismisses it as a printing error. Eventually, the doctor arrives and responds to all of Joe's health-related inquiries with phrases like, "kick ass," instead of providing detailed answers. Additionally, the doctor labels Joe as mentally impaired and demands a payment of $5 billion. It is at this moment that Joe notices the year 2505 written on the bill. Suddenly, it dawns on him that he has been inside the hibernation pod for a staggering 500 years. Joe finds it hard to believe at first and approaches the window, only to be taken aback by the vastly transformed state of the city he sees outside. Buildings are tumbling down, and some are barely standing, held together by ropes. Meanwhile, the doctor becomes alarmed when he realizes that Joe doesn't have a citizen tattoo on his wrist. In a state of panic, Joe flees from the hospital, while the doctor contacts the police to report him for not settling his hospital expenses. A voice narrates that Joe has awakened to a world facing severe problems and crises. The economy is in a state of severe neglect, a massive dust storm has destroyed all food sources. And the most popular movie in the country is titled Ass. Joe decides to watch the film that has won Oscars, only to find himself staring at someone's behind for the entire 90-minute duration. During the night, he is apprehended for being unscannable and is brought to a court for legal proceedings. In the court, Joe is assigned a lawyer who turns out to be Frito Pendejo, the person Joe encountered when he first arrived in 2505. Joe presents his case in a sensible manner, explaining why he is unscannable. But the lawyers and judge simply scoff at him. Ultimately, the judge declares Joe guilty and sentences him to imprisonment. While all this is happening, Rita also emerges from her hibernation pod and attempts to reach out to her manager and boyfriend, Upgrade. Simultaneously, Joe is brought to an automated tattoo parlor where citizens receive identification tattoos that render them scannable. The machine inquires about Joe's name, but he begins to express his confusion about the situation. As a result, the machine interprets his response as not sure and proceeds to tattoo it on his wrist. Soon after, he is led to undergo an amplitude and IQ test, where he is asked simple addition questions. Joe successfully answers all the addition questions and becomes astonished to witness others struggling to identify shapes. Following this, he is transported to the prison. Gradually, he starts to comprehend that everyone in the present world lacks intelligence. Consequently, he informs the guard that he is scheduled to be released from jail on that day. The unintelligent guard allows Joe to leave, but the alarms alert the authorities about the escaped inmate. Somehow, Joe manages to evade them and returns to Frito's residence. He holds the belief that a time machine must have been invented during the past 500 years and seeks Frito's assistance in obtaining one. However, Frito initially declines to help Joe. In a clever move, Joe tricks Frito by promising him a payment of $8 billion in exchange for his assistance. Eventually, Frito discloses that he knows the whereabouts of the time machine. However, at that very moment, the police arrive and knock on the door, searching for Joe. In a swift move, both Joe and Frito escape through the window and embark on a car journey to the museum. Along the way, they encounter Rita, who is still engaged in deceiving the same individual. While driving, a device outside the car scans Joe's wrist, alerting the police to his whereabouts. Unfortunately, the car's battery dies, forcing them to exit the vehicle. Joe, Frito, and Rita flee, determined to reach the time machine. Joe leads them to Costco, which has become a central hub for various transactions. While waiting for the metro, Rita goes to use the restroom. However, before she returns, Joe's wrist is inadvertently scanned, triggering an alert throughout the area about the presence of a criminal. Unfortunately, Joe is apprehended by the police this time. However, instead of being taken to prison, he is escorted to the White House. In this bewildering turn of events, Joe encounters President Camacho and his secretaries. It is revealed that the IQ test Joe took in prison astonished everyone because he had the highest IQ they had ever encountered. Due to his exceptional intelligence, the president appoints Joe as the new Secretary of Interior. Subsequently, they all proceed to the House of Representatives, where the president publicly announces that the challenges of food scarcity and dust storms will be addressed by their newly appointed Secretary of Interior, Mr. Not Sure. The president also pledges to pardon Joe's time in prison if he successfully resolves the problem at hand. Following this, a cabinet meeting takes place, during which the secretaries request Joe to share something intelligent. Taking advantage of the situation, Joe asks Frito to sketch a map indicating the location of the time machine. Afterwards, Joe leads them to a field intended for growing crops. He instructs them to fetch Rita, believing she might possess knowledge that could aid them with the crops. Eventually, they all gather at the field, and in secret, Frito surreptitiously passes the map to Joe. Simultaneously, Rita arrives at the location. Joe takes her aside, devising a plan to escape using the map. However, Joe's plan collapses as he discovers that Frito's map is nothing more than a simple line. It is at this moment that Joe realizes a crucial detail: people have been irrigating the crops with the energy drink Brondo. Joe convenes a cabinet meeting to propose the switch from Brondo to water for watering the crops. However, the secretaries vehemently oppose his idea, considering it to be terrible. Rather than engaging in a logical argument, Joe takes a different approach. He claims that he can communicate with the plants, and they are expressing their need for water. In a few days, everything goes well according to the plan. However, the production of the energy drink Brondo decreases significantly, resulting in its stocks running out completely. This sudden shortage of Brondo leads to half of the population losing their jobs, causing them to protest and riot outside the White House. The news reports that Joe is taken to court on charges of causing unemployment, and is found guilty. As a result, he is sentenced to 1 night of rehabilitation. In this new world, rehabilitation involves a criminal being pursued by a large truck in an arena, while a crowd of spectators cheers for the truck. The rehabilitation process typically results in the death of the criminal involved. Joe is brought to the arena for his rehabilitation, while Rita sadly returns to the White House, preparing to go to the time machine with Frito. The rehabilitation event is broadcasted on national television. Joe is pursued by a large and deadly truck as he maneuvers around in a small car. At that moment, Rita notices a rose plant growing outside, realizing that Joe's idea to water the plants had been successful. She urges Frito to take her to the arena. Rita devises a plan to showcase the thriving crops on television, hoping it will lead to Joe's punishment being pardoned. Meanwhile, Joe is still fighting for his life against the pursuing death truck. Rita arrives just in time and convinces a cameraman to accompany Frito and capture footage of the flourishing crops. She then gains control of the monitoring room and operates the control panel. Frito, on the other hand, finally reaches the field and starts filming the crops. The video clip is shown on the big screen for everyone to see. Witnessing the successful crops, President Camacho intervenes and saves Joe from the imminent danger. He also grants Joe a pardon, resulting in the crowd erupting in cheers of joy. During the celebration, Rita confesses that she has no desire to return to her previous time because she prefers the future. They bid their final farewells, but before Joe departs, President Camacho calls him up on stage and announces him as the new vice president. With hopeful gazes from the crowd, Joe feels compelled to accept the position and remain in the year 2505. Frito guides a bewildered Joe to the machine, and it is finally unveiled that the so-called time machine is actually a ride meant for children. The scene transitions to a few months later, where Joe is elected as the President of the United States, and Rita becomes his wife and the First Lady. As time progresses, Joe and Rita have 3 children together, who are acclaimed as the brightest youngsters globally. Joe's presidency brings forth a new era, and society looks forward to a future where intelligence is once again revered.